good evening, and I'm so glad that you're here with us tonight. We put together a presentation we hope will be interesting. Uh, uh, and I hope this finds you all doing well. We're wrapping up our year, and it's been an interesting year for me as the chair, trying to get through a whole year of what we were hoping for to be in-person technical meetings, but we had to go virtual for all of them, which presents its own challenges for interesting and value-added presentations, but we did our best, and I think the team came together. So once again, welcome. We really want to make this, Kurt's going to go through this, but we really want this to be interactive instead of just a one-way. So we tried to set this up where you're going to have the opportunity at the end to provide comments or ask questions. You know, we want to really have a good dialogue towards the end of this, and we allocated time for that. I hope your careers are going well, and we appreciate your interest in being a part of ASQ and taking advantage of your member features that you have as far as being a part of our local section and coming to these meetings. We just set up our leader team for 2022, and we are always looking for help. And you know, we ask at every newsletter and every meeting. You know, if you can devote any time to helping us out, run the local section, we'd really appreciate you reaching out. We have all of our positions set, although our program chair is currently open, and either one or two people could run that. And that's really just looking for programs for our technical meetings, or creating content, or coming up with ideas to present to the leadership team. And we have other leaders that are holding down multiple positions, so there's plenty of activity that we could use some help. So that's my ongoing request. Come on in, help us out. It's great to volunteer, and you'll get a lot out of it. Working with us, you get a lot of support. You're not going to be on your own. All of us on the leadership team have been doing all of these positions for a number of years, so you'll get great support, and the new leaders will attest to that, I believe. So anyway, that's what I have to start us off. Kurt, have you set everything up?
I am struggling. My PowerPoint locked up on me. I don't know what happened, and I'm trying to share. Bear with me. It's like my dog ate my homework, right? Let's see. Let's see if this. Bear with me here. I'm just going to go back to the. I may have to get out and come back in here. I don't know what's going on. I'm going to disconnect for a minute.
Oh, okay.
Maybe okay now here. Hang on. I'm getting a white screen. Let me just.
Okay, well, Kurt, I've got my presentation.
Let me.
I can just share my screen.
Yeah, I'll let you. Yeah.
So do you just want to talk through your
Yes, yeah.
presentation?
Yeah. Oh boy, this is going on. Okay, yeah. Well, again, welcome. What is going on? I apologize for this. Yeah. Basically, I wanted to say thank you. Welcome everybody to the technical meeting. And so many technical difficulties. What we're saying as far as the team meetings go, we ask that you keep your speakers on mute and that you also the cameras, turn your cameras off so that it doesn't interfere with bandwidth. We also have the chat that I believe everyone should have access to. It's at the top of the screen. It looks like the little cartoon bubble. So you should be able to chat. If not, there is a Stinto that I set up, which is a temporary chat web-based chat feature that I'm trying to share, but I can't seem to share. Everything is locked up on me here. Hold on a second. Yep. Nope. I cannot do anything. And with that, let me just let's see. There was the chat, and that was something that we had run into last time with a problem, and then, like I said, we came up with an alternate that I like I said, I have a screen with a QR code, so you could just shine your phone on it and be able to chat. But you should be able to use the chat feature in Teams. With that, let me turn it over to you, Brian. I am, like I said, I am completely locked up on my PowerPoint. I'm going to shut all my PowerPoints down.
Okay.
Are you able to share?
So I'll share my screen and once again, folks, as we're going through the presentations, I'm going to cover supplier management, and then Grubbs is going to cover auditing. And please write down comments and questions as we go through it so we can have a nice discussion at the end. And you know, I want to say I'm not an expert. I have experience in this area. And I'm sure that some of you folks are much more qualified than I am, but this is really for us to just come up with some information for discussion and some back and forth as quality professionals. One other note here, today is my 1-year anniversary at my new organization. So it's been an interesting year and most of my focus has been on supplier quality. I thought it was appropriate to cover this topic this evening. So let me get my presentation going here. Share my screen. And everybody can see this cover page. Somebody say yes.
Nope.
Not seeing it yet.
It's coming up. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe it may take a minute.
And just so you know, I think my PowerPoint is back up. So Gary, if you need me to present, I can.
Yeah, that'd be fine.
So can everybody see this cover page?
Not seeing it yet, Brian.
And the technical difficulties continue.
They continue. You want me to try, Brian?
Yeah, hold on a sec. Yeah, why don't you give it a shot, Kurt?
Okay.
I have to stop sharing. my screen that nobody can see.
The double secret screen here. Okay, so.
Yay.
Looks
good.
There we go.
Got that.
We're all good?
We're good.
Good.
Okay. Well, this is my presentation, everyone. I'm going to be covering supplier management. Like I said, it's just one part of this amazing field that we call quality management. So we're going to focus on this for the next few. Next slide, please. So once again, just to provide a little humor here, because if as quality professionals, I think we need a sense of humor. Not a goes by when you really need to have one. So what I've discovered in my journey is when you look at supplier management, you as the organization and the suppliers that you're pulling from, quality a lot of times ends up in the middle, and the two sides saying fix the other company, and you're kind of the referee in the middle trying to maintain partnership and create positive outcomes. So it can be an extreme challenge. And what I found in my career is usually when there's supplier issues, supplier quality issues, I think both organizations tend to have some contributing factor to just about everything. And there's actions that need to really happen on both sides in order to once again have those positive outcomes. Next slide. So supplier management, obviously it starts with the requirements. What are the requirements that need to be implemented and maintained? And I think everybody in this virtual room, their companies are certified to one or a number of standards, whether it's ISO 9001, aerospace, automotive, medical device, FDA, FAA. There's a number of standards out there, but I think they all basically have these common general requirements for supplier management. It's selecting and qualifying and evaluating and monitoring those suppliers, and some form of supplier development, supplier improvement. Next slide. And like many QMS aspects, supplier management is very, very cross-functional. In the selection and qualification phase, it generally involves finance and accounting, purchasing or the sourcing group. Certainly engineering and operations need to get involved, quality assurance, quality engineering. And then in the evaluation and monitoring phase, that generally falls onto the purchasing group and the quality group as far as monitoring performance, developing and generating metrics and doing the analysis, and then reporting on it. And then development and improvement involves purchasing and sourcing, once again, engineering, operations, and quality. So this can be an extreme challenge. You know, some aspects of quality management tend to be focused in one or two areas, but this is one that really takes most of the organization into account, and most of the organization is involved, and it can be extremely challenging for the quality professional. Next slide. So in the selection and qualification phase, it really involves a supplier selection team, depending on the size of your organization. That could be one, or it could be 7 or 8 people. And when you get involved in selection and qualification, it usually involves some kind of a supplier survey, supplier visits, if possible. There's a financial evaluation of the health of that organization. And then you get into a quoting process if the decision is to move forward. And it's essentially confirming the requirements, making sure they're defined, clarified, and understood by the supplier. Specifications, measurement methods, accept, reject criteria. And then we have an initial capability assessment if we're going to go this far. Sometimes it doesn't make it past the quoting process. But if we do get past that, we do a capability assessment, and then there's a decision whether to put them on an approved supplier list, which also has its own set of criteria created by the organization. As you can imagine, this is the critical stage in this process. If all these things aren't done well, then all the issues are going to come up after the switch is flipped and work starts happening. But of course, because this is the most important, it's also one of the most difficult, because such a push to get these parts set up at the supplier and for them to start delivering product, that there's time pressures involved, this cross-functional communication that I mentioned, because so many different groups are involved, and just, you know, the elements of project management, managing time, managing the project, making sure that everything is covered and resolved if issues come up. Next slide. Then we get into evaluation and monitoring, which is its own separate team. There's all the data collection and measurement that has to go has to be set up and implemented. And that usually involves setting up some KPIs or key performance indicators. You know, are the shipments in full, on time, no error? GPPM metrics, non-conformances through CARs and SCARs, correct? And, you know, this collection and measurement, is it going to be weekly, monthly, quarterly, year on year? Supplier audits usually get involved at this stage in their performance in those audits. And there's criteria evaluation, improvement plans, putting them on probationary status. So there's a lot going on in this stage. And all the similar challenges are there: communication, competing priorities within the organization. And this becomes a real issue at this time. You know, quality is chasing quality, is chasing delivery, and operations are chasing cost improvements, reductions. Next slide, please. And then development and improvement should follow. Companies are resource starved, so they don't have time to work on these types of things. So they end up spending a lot of time in that second phase dealing with issues. But the collaboration is what's exploring additional partnerships with those suppliers and trying to get involved in some improvement programs. You know, running Kaizen events at the suppliers if there were, Lean Six Sigma projects, design reviews, relationship building supplier visits, not just doing supplier audits, you know, going in there and seeing how you can partnership together. These are more strategic, but it really helps with the experience between the supplier and the organization, and develop a long-term relationship. Next slide, please. So the challenges, some I've already mentioned, and this is where we can really talk about some things at the end when we have some time. And like I said at the beginning, many opportunities for improvement can be traced to both organizations. Requirements are unclear, measurement methods aren't aligned, sampling methods are not aligned, information control becomes a challenge. Drawings are revised and the supplier doesn't get the current rev. Requirements are unclear. In certain industries, there's a lot of subjective quality requirements that are hard to align between organizations. So there can be a lot of difficulty there. The communication difficulties I've already talked about, cross-functional, within and between organizations, when everybody's dealing with the day-to-day, and it's very difficult to keep lines of communication clear and wrapping up issues that come up. Supply chain disruptions, changing personnel and turnover. I think that's really become an issue in the last few years. A lot of employees are moving on to other organizations, and a lot of these relationships, a lot of the issues end up getting dropped or the information gets lost, and it's really difficult to not have this to be an impact. Competing, conflicting priorities, like I said, you're chasing a supplier on quality and purchasing at the same time as chasing them to deliver parts. And in their pressure to deliver parts, they end up having quality issues, which ends up driving up their cost. And so they don't like when we come chasing them to do cost reductions. And then sister companies, if you have a large organization, you're getting supplies from sister company facilities. And sometimes it can be very difficult just to get change and get improvements within your own organization. Don't know why that would be. Sometimes within the family can be some of the hardest places to make improvements. Next slide. And some recommendations here. When it comes to supplier management, really, as a quality professional, you should be trying to take a mediator approach. Don't take sides. Your job is to facilitate a positive outcome, realizing that there's probably things that need to be done on both sides in order to solve a problem. And it's your challenge to navigate through that and get those things done between both organizations. I just had meetings today that were doing just those things. Uncover and define those and document those informal agreements. A lot of times we're dealing with informal agreements between parties, and it wasn't really identified and cleared. So then the personnel changes, and then we start having more problems. Communication, involve the supply in design and development whenever possible. When you're going through the new part qualification process, really involving them to try to figure out, design for manufacturability, cost reductions. I just had an issue with that earlier this week, where it would have been beneficial to do that. Situational awareness, that's one of those soft skills. Suppliers are being pressured by all these different groups within your company. And when you're needing to reach out to them and get something done, you need to be aware of the fact that they're getting chased from a number of different people and different priorities. So you need to navigate through that effectively. And creating a robust method for tracking issues, because, we work in quality. So our job is chasing issues, chasing people, chasing promises, chasing due dates. And it really is helpful for you to have that in your toolkit as a capability. Don't allow issues to drop. Your credibility is at stake on both sides. Project management, Outlook tasks, you know, in Outlook, I use tasks quite a bit because there's just so many things to chase. And there's no way I'm going to keep track of it unless I use something like a tool like that. Individual supplier files, keeping journals by supplier, very quality equals spacing, unfortunately. And keeping your organization updated on all these activities. You may be working on some great things with some of these suppliers, but if you're not keeping your organization up to date, then they just don't understand that your suppliers are actually, and you and your suppliers are working hard on trying to solve things and improve the situation. Next slide. And resources, you know, you've got everybody in this room here to help you out with your problems, with ideas. You got ASQ articles, webinars, training professionals there. I've mentioned this a couple of times. If you're familiar with aerospace, you can use to set up all these aspects of supplier management. You just go to that web address and go into the supply chain process, click on buy, and that's where you can get into all those information, procedures, metrics, forms, and all you have to do is register as a user. It's all free. And like I said, you know, your local section, you have member leaders ready to help. We're not experts, but we have lots of experience. We've seen lots of things, and we can certainly help you in your challenges and your efforts. That's all I have. Let's quickly move on to Gary here, and he can provide supplier auditing. And
Thanks,
then
Brian.
we'll have some time for questions
Thanks,
and
Brian.
comments.
Thanks,
Gary.
Brian. Thanks, Brian. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Gary Grubbs. I am the chair-elect, and I want to talk to you about auditing basics. Been doing auditing for probably 20 years, and probably the biggest thing I've had to deal with is the fear of auditing is worse than actually doing the audit. And once you can sort of overcome that, I think you start to enable the process of doing it. Because once you get into doing the process, it's not all that bad. Next slide, Kurt. Let's go through the basics. Good auditing requires planning. If you're not going to plan it, then you're going to end up wasting people's time, including yours. The other thing is auditing is about gathering data to compare your actual performance to what your required or your documented performance is, not what your desired performance should be. Auditing is designed to be a sample at a point in time. So just because you have an audit and you do well on it today doesn't mean that you're going to do well on it in the future. Auditing has got to focus on improving the process. And if you're focusing on improving the procedure, then you're really not doing auditing. The goal of auditing is to get corrective action before customers get involved. By the same token, we need to understand what auditing is not. The first and foremost, you're not out there to catch people doing something wrong. If you're doing this well, you want to try to recognize and reward the people that are doing things right. It should never be about comparing departments. It should never be about having some sort of hidden agenda like we need to generate findings. And it should never be unscheduled unless there's fraud or legal or regulatory issues that are involved. Next slide, please. Probably the most important thing that I've learned about auditing is preparation. If you do the prep, the audit should flow pretty smoothly. And there's no way you're ever going to be a good auditor until you understand what it is you're auditing. So you got to understand the process. So what are you going to do? You got to read the procedure. You got to look at the last audit and follow up on any findings. And you want to focus on how the inputs to this process become outputs to this process. You're going to hear this over and over again. And then you got to follow the process probably from the end to the beginning if you're not experienced, because that's the easiest way. Because if you start at the end and you work backwards, there's always something there. If you start at the beginning and go to the end, you may have to come back at a later time to get more information. Another thing that I've really been stressing to all of our auditors, especially if you're going into an area you're not familiar with, make sure you're aware of the safety rules in the area you're auditing. You know, if there's fork trucks and things like that, you need to be on high alert. And that may not be something you're used to in your normal environment. Next thing, you got to understand the scope. That's going to tell you what should and should not be audited. And it's especially critical when you're dealing with shared areas like warehouses, purchasing, labs, things like this, where you can have multiple information or multiple items to audit from different areas that may or may not be in your scope. And you also got to determine how far back you got to go before you're in some other process. The next one is critical. Who's going to be your contact? And depending upon what you're doing, you may need more than one. But whoever your contact is, they've got to be knowledgeable of the operations, the procedures, and more the computer systems. You know, and whatever you do, you got to plan the date and time with the auditees. And from past experience, don't try to do it during a holiday week. It's just a complete waste of time and it frustrates everybody. Next slide, please. During the audit, first thing I train auditors, you walk in, hi, Bob, I'm here to do the audit. Is this a good time? You need to understand that Bob made this plan last week and there were no issues. Overnight, the world just turned upside down for him. And if it's not a good time, the last thing you want to be doing is pestering this poor person by doing an audit. So it's okay to reschedule. The other thing I train new auditors, copy everything you touch and get screen prints, screen captures of as needed. I'm telling you right now, your memory is never as good as you think it is. And if you're going to get all these pieces of paper, you want to put them in order of how you did the audit. And I usually try to number the pages. When you're doing the audit, you want to ask the open-ended questions. And really the auditee should be doing the work and your role is to sort of guide them. And you really want to focus on recent events. And for things that are rare, if they haven't occurred in a while, that's okay. The next question is, okay, this rare thing, if it happened, what would you do? And if the answer is, well, gee, I don't know, then that's an issue. Or if the answer is, oh, well, you look at the procedure and it says on page 5, you do this. You know, you want to follow the process. When the auditing world started focusing on the process approach, initially, I thought it was a lot of baloney. I'll be the first one to admit. But what I was doing in the past was I was really sort of auditing to a procedure, and I spent way more time changing the procedure than I did improving the process. And what I really want to do now is when I do an audit is I look at my inputs, I look at my outputs. And when you've covered how all the inputs and show how they become outputs, that's a good sign that you're pretty complete on your audit. The other thing, I don't care who you are, you always want to confirm any observations or non-conformances before leaving, as you're not the subject matter expert. And remember, when you're doing these, you've got to write it in language that the people you're auditing understand. Know things like, I found uncontrolled documents. Next slide. After the audit, minimize the amount of time between the audit and writing the report. The longer it takes, it usually leads to redoing some part of the audit because you don't remember what you did. And when you're doing your audit reports, you want to summarize. You've looked at a whole bunch of data, and you got to figure out, how can I take this large amount of data that I looked at and summarize it? An example might be, I reviewed Sally Smith's lab notebook for November of 2021. All the samples tested were properly documented with a date, sample number, and result per procedure 1, 2, 3. Now, I may have looked at 31 pages in that notebook, but I've condensed that all into one brief sentence. And what I like to train my auditors on is that the goal should be, if someone reads your audit report, they should be able to retrace your steps to get whatever information looked at, and they should be able to draw the same conclusion. I think part of the problem with people getting all freaked out about doing audits is this whole reporting thing. The goal is, you're not writing the next great American novel. You're writing an audit report. It should be terse, it should be quick, and it should be to the point. The audit reports I've always used are really sort of a checklist with my evidence in one column, and then a corresponding compliant, non-compliant, finding, observation kind of thing in another column. And when I look at any audit report, the first thing I'm doing is, I'm not reading it. I'm scanning it because I want to see who, what, when, where, why, and I want to see details. No, I talked to the supervisor and he said all shipments today were issue free. I swear to God, when I first took over in my last role as a full-time employee at Eastman, I looked at an audit report, and I swear to God, it was 2 pages long, and it had a whole bunch of, I talked to the supervisor and he said everything was fine. Next slide, please. After the audit, as I said before, highlight best practices, people that were helpful, catch people doing things right as opposed to catching people doing things wrong. Another thing that I've learned over time is, someone like the audit process owner, the lead auditor, somebody needs to screen the report before the report gets issued and findings are raised. And what are you looking for? You want to look for unrealistic findings, like, we need to build a new process. And if that's not aligned with our strategic plan, then that has no business being in the audit. That's somebody's opinion. The other thing that I found can be really helpful, because I've worked in some more regulated industries, is items that are technically true, but could easily be misinterpreted by second, third-party auditors or customers. And I'm going to give you an example. The bolts were not inspected upon arrival versus the bolts are from a qualified just-in-time supplier. Both of those things are true, but it certainly sounds better to have the former, the latter, as opposed to the former. And then, like I said, the old insufficient data, like the foreman said everything was fine. Insufficient sample size. Yeah, I realize it's a judgment call, but one of my auditing trainers taught me this, and I've used this a whole bunch of times. Once is an event or a miracle, which is acceptable for something that happens probably once every 3 to 5 years. Twice is coincidence, which is acceptable for things that happen maybe once a year, once every 2 years. And 3 or more times starts to resemble a proper sample size, which is really better for daily or regular events. Remember, what you're doing in your audit has to be integrated with some sort of follow-up, like a car log. And if observations are issued, which I think are a strong recommendation, then they've got to be followed up. I've seen people do, well, this was just an OFI, so we don't have to do anything. I think you owe the auditor the decency to say, if you're not going to do it, why it's not going to be done. Because I've always told auditees, you're under no obligation to do observations. You're getting somebody's opinion, and this is what their opinion is, and they're sharing it with you to try to help you. Next slide, please. So what have I learned about the best ways to improve audit processes? The first one is train your auditors and have them work as an apprentice on their first audit under the guidance of an experienced auditor. Came up with this one when I first started in quality. I was working in a lab. I had people come in. It's like, hey, Gary, I have to do an audit. What is it that I have to do? Now, I know these people went to some sort of training, but they really had no understanding of what was expected of them. The other thing I always do when I'm training auditors, when you're auditing a process, what's the most important part of the process being audited? Focus on that. If you're auditing a warehouse, what's the most important thing? Are they picking the right things for shipments? Are the shipments going out on time? And is their inventory where it's supposed to be, and is it properly valued? If you're auditing a lab, how fast are they turning sample results around? How accurate are they? Are they reporting the results to the right people? And if they have issues, do they have a process where they go through and they find out why something wasn't within where they expected it to be? The other thing you've got to do with new auditors is you've got to give them corrective feedback and to improve and understand what is the acceptable level for audit reports. And I've done this many times. If you don't do that, then you're not going to have good audit reports. If you take the time, you pull them aside, you do it one-on-one, look, this audit is a little light. Here's what it's missing. I think we need to get some more information. And then once that happens once or twice, then they've learned what the bar is, where it is, and what they need to do to get through it. And if your procedures sound like the standard, then you got to rewrite them to language that your company uses and understands. Next page. Do not have your procedures aligned with the standard, align them with how you do business. The other thing you've got to do, everybody has experienced downsizing probably in their quality department sometime in the recent past. You've got to align what your ability to audit is with your quality system. Can you do things like combine procedures and audits for things like documents and records instead of doing one for documents and one for records? For things like corrective action and complaints, because typically those two things go together. At Eastman, we even combine calibration and maintenance because there's a lot of similarities in how we do both of those. Can you use the same common procedures in different product areas for things like auditing, maintenance, purchasing, CAPA, dock control, things like that? Another thing that I've used very successfully in some of my more regulated areas, I've combined regulated areas with non-regulated areas and at least had a common structure for the ISO elements. And then I've used things like color coding in the example that I have below, where all documents are stored. The document control system must comply with Company Records Retention Procedure 100. Additionally, all medical device final quality records shall be maintained for a minimum of 20 years. And when you write that procedure, you say, okay, everything that's in red text applies only to my medical products. Next page. One of the things I've found helps quite a bit if I can get my top manager to review the status of the audit schedule and the items on the corrective action log at regular staff meetings. Another thing I've learned a long time ago, worry a lot less about auditor independence and more about expertise to do the audit. If there's a valid business reason for an auditor to do that audit, you state it in the audit report. With the most recent changes to the standard, we're now trying to use risk. We're being asked to assess risk on everything. Well, you got to use that to your advantage to minimize the number of audits on elements of the standard that are working well or pose less risk. So really what you want to do is you want to focus in on that ISO clause 6.1.2 and say, how can I use risk and say that if I do this audit every 2 years instead of every 1 year, what is my justification? What's the basis for that? And then most importantly, Your role in quality is to be the business partner and not the police. Next page. This is something that I found is really cool. I found this on the internet. There's a gentleman who works for a company called Oxybridge. His name is Christopher Paris. He's pretty outspoken and not generally welcomed in a lot of ASQ circles because he's had some critical things to say about them. But you can go and get a template, and here is the link. And the auditor, this Christopher Paris, actually puts in this toolkit that he gives up the right to his intellectual property, and the only thing he asks is that consultants don't use it as their own. He does do some occasional updates. It contains instructions on how to use the template kit. It's all Excel and Word documents. I personally have used the car log, which I think is really good and better than anything I've ever seen anyone develop. I use the audit schedule, which I would say is good. And I've reviewed their audit report templates, which looks a lot like the ones we use. And their car form looks very similar to the one we use. And yes, it's really worth using, and it's better than what most consultants provide. And I have a little, my humor is now at the end. So next slide, please. I love Dilbert, and I think this is a great one. I'm the new sadist. What happened to the old one? He went to sadist paradise. And Dilbert comes back. The auditing department? Thank you for your time.
Okay, thanks, Gary. We'll open it up now. Hopefully everyone can chat. You should also be able to unblock your speakers and again, to ask questions, make comments of either of the presentations. I've got a couple more slides or just one thing to show you, and that is, again, this is one of the ground rules I wanted to go over earlier, was at the end, we do have the voice of the customer survey. I will send the link in a chat to you on this, as well as I will include it in when I send out the email for your attendance at this meeting. But with that, let me just let's open it up, and if there are any comments or questions, I will stop presenting. Hopefully. All right. Any comments or questions? I had one for you, Brian, and it was interesting when you're talking about sister plants being a supplier for you. And the question is, if you've got a complaint, are you the customer? Is that a customer complaint for the sister plant, or is it a supplier complaint for you?
I guess it depends on the organization. The current one that I'm in, we treat our sister companies like suppliers. So I will issue a SCAR to a sister company just like I would to an outside supplier. And like I said, sister companies can sometimes be a challenge because you're basically all in the same family, and there isn't that pressure of being an outside supplier and is my customer going to drop me? So you can have some issues with discipline, and it just requires, once again, situational awareness and navigation, and try to find the right people to get to move your issues forward. I don't know if that answered your question. Yeah. Or
no, because I've run into that issue myself, and again, it was really not in our sister, and we're in the same division and everything. They provided us a raw material, and but the thing I thought was funny was we put all our emphasis on customer complaints, but supplier complaints didn't get the attention. And I thought, man, if we wanted it to get some attention, it should be a customer complaint that gets on the sister plant, the supplier, and that's why I ran into that issue. But yeah, I've asked that question to some others. I guess the other question I had for you was, do you run into, when you start talking about defective parts per million, and I know from past experience, I've had some trouble with upper management understanding it. And to give you an example, it's like, 1 month you report the defective parts per million was 1,500. The next month it's 1,520. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, we're going in the wrong direction. We got to get a task force. We got to figure out what's going on. And it's like, it goes back to, noise and understanding variability. And, and then you throw defective parts per million on top of it. And I think it just kind of sometimes frightens and confuses.
Yeah, I've definitely found the same thing. My current organization doesn't use DPPM as a metric. I think one of the reasons is it's so difficult to pull together the data, because we have, I don't know, 150 suppliers, most of them active, and pulling together the amount received to apply it to the defect amount. It's a real difficult thing. But you're right, upper management, they don't understand it a lot of times, and that it's a predictive statistic based on past history, and it's trying to, because you get into these percentages and the percentages are so small that you try to convert it into a whole number. But 1,500 and 1,520, there's no difference. So I guess, when you're going to have an audience like that, I guess taking a couple of minutes just to explain it before you just throw the number up, that can be helpful sometimes. Or maybe it's just not a good metric to use, try to come up with something different, because some folks, they just either don't have the bandwidth or they just don't want to bother to understand it.
Brian, I wanted to make a comment. This is Mike Stolia. I like the very beginning where you say very often quality has the position of being the referee between the two, because many times it's just you're presented with something and you have to go into discovery mode in terms of what is it that you saw, witness A, and what is it that you saw, witness B. And very often the story that's conveyed is dramatically different. And that sometimes you just have to try to parse out where it meets in the middle somewhere.
Yeah. Like I said, almost on a daily basis, I'm running into issues where the requirements aren't clear, yet we reject an item. We go back to try to return it to the supplier, and the supplier says, well, I delivered what you asked for. So I end up spending a lot of my time clarifying requirements, aligning inspection methods and criteria, accept and reject. It's really just trying to fix something that's already in place. It can be a real challenge, because in the meantime, we're trying to get parts in, we're trying to get production done, and it can take time, it can take people's resources, and once again, it can be very cross-functional sometimes to get to the bottom of some of these disputes between the supplier and the organization.
So I have a comment on that, Brian. So one of the things that we do at our business is we supply the supplier with a document with specifications. And one of the things that we share with them is defect awareness. So some of the issues that we found if we're, producing a particular part and issues that we found, we share that with our suppliers if it's outsourced, anything from scratches, depending on the product. We also share our incoming inspection reports so that they know what we're looking at incoming, so they can look at the same thing as outgoing.
Yeah, all those things are excellent. And it can only help, right? Yeah, those are great practices. And we do some of that where I currently am. Um, Did more of that at a previous company where the requirements and supplemental documentation is what you're talking about. The drawing, you can only get so much on the drawing. And,
right.
Visual aids, quality alerts, inspection plans, all those things are going to help with clarifying either subjective things or clearing up, I guess, supplementing drawing requirements and specification requirements. So those are great ideas.
Yeah, our suppliers have found it very helpful. Even validation, if it's a new product, the requirements for validation.
Anything for Gary?
I asked Gary before I left our quality auditor tonight on the way out, anything advice he had, or one of the things, what's the big lesson he learned? And I think you hit it off hit it out of the park at the very beginning. So it was that, again, just the whole preparation. And he was saying, it depends on whether you're the auditor or auditee, but in both cases, it says being prepared. And I think you really touched on it really well about making sure that the person that's being audited knows what to expect, knows what he's going to, and can really present well too. So I think that goes, I thought that was a good point that he had brought up and that you really, you emphasized.
One other thing that I really didn't mention that I should have is I've always viewed my role when I'm doing auditing to not only do auditing, but to coach people on how to be audited. If they start wandering, they start, they start giving me more information than what I ask. It's like, you need to be aware that, while you're doing this, you could be silently digging the hole. If I ask you what time it is, tell me what time it is. Don't tell me how to build a watch.
I like that.
Gary, I was going to jump on that a little bit with, I think at one of your slides you said, knowing your audience. I think it's very, very important. If you're doing an internal audit within your own company, and you start going and you're finding the hair on the back of your head starting to go up. You're saying, oh, there's something here. It's very important at that point, if it's an internal audit, to engage the person with the forensics. He says, I want to show you where I'm going here. I want to show you what I am seeing and where this evidence is leading me, so that you understand this part. Clearly, if you're in a outsider role, if you've come in to audit a supplier or something like that, it's a little different. If you start finding something, you just do the thing and then present the data after you've collected it.
Well, but I've always trained my auditors that when you're going into an area, especially if you're not familiar with it, this doesn't look like what the procedure says. Am I missing something? I mean, I always take the high road. I always assume that I've made a mistake. And I ask for, this doesn't look quite right. The procedure says we're supposed to do this, but it looks like we're doing this on this particular one. And I've always trained people, you want to give the benefit of the doubt that because you're not the subject matter expert, you may have misinterpreted something. And I think you want to make sure that you're clarifying that. And once again, you're trying to do it in a way that a valued business partner would do. This doesn't look right to me, or this doesn't appear like what the procedure says. The first one, I'm sort of accusing you. The second one, it's like, maybe I'm missing something here.
Yep. And one other comment I want to make about Gary's presentation. And then I also want to mention to the folks in the room here, this is a difficult format to ask questions or comments. There's the hand raise feature up at the top of the screen. The little guy there, you can raise your hand. And that way we know that you want to make a comment or a question. But Gary, one thing I wanted to mention, you made a point about resources and trying to structure your audit so you can maximize the scarce resources you have. When I was at Lennox, I set up an audit plan for the audit team. And when you're setting up an audit plan, you can either do an inch wide and a mile deep, or you can do a mile wide and an inch deep. And I set up a plan where it was basically taking the mile wide and inch deep approach. I'd send a team into a department and they would audit a number of different aspects of the standard. So I think that approach for auditing anyway, I think that presents itself well because you can cover large areas of the standard with a few amount of resources. And if there are issues that are going to be found, chances are you're going to find them. You don't need to go a mile deep if there are issues that need to be fixed,
I see Sharon's raised her hand.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I have a question. Sometimes when you're auditing and you find a corrective action, sometimes you just hate writing it up because they'll never do it. They'll never fix the corrective action. Do you have any advice on that?
Well, I mean, I think it depends on what it is. I think if it's a small document error and you've looked at a bunch of documents and their documents are in pretty good shape. I swear to God, this actually happened on a IATF 16949 audit. My lab supervisor had a really good rapport with the auditor. He sort of looked at this, it doesn't look quite right. Why don't you just go fix it? I mean, he had looked at a bunch of documents and he realized he found the needle in the haystack. So he didn't raise that. I mean, if you go in there and you find systemic problems, then I think you have to write it up.
Well, we find systemic problems, say, with preventive maintenance activities not being performed because, they're working 7 days a week, 24/7, and business is booming. And a year later, you said, hey, we have this corrective action that you still haven't touched yet. So those are pieces we're having.
Okay, but in that case, Sharon, the thing I would be saying is if you've gone a year without doing this so-called preventive maintenance and the world hasn't ended, do you really need to do it? I mean, we're struggling with that right now at Eastman. We have a whole bunch of PMs that were written probably 20 years ago in our system, and nobody's really sort of sorted out the fact that we don't have the same level of resources to do the same things we did 20 years ago. And once again, the maintenance folks have to do their alignment with their ability to get the work done versus what is it that they need to do.
Yeah, but I think to Sharon's point, it's not up to the auditor to figure that out. You know, there's a management issue here that the auditor is writing up findings and they're not getting addressed. They're not getting corrected. So that, you know, that should go into management review, and management should be taking action on it, either allocating resources for PM or, like you said, Gary, changing the procedures so the PM doesn't have to be done as often because it may look like it's not needed, you know?
Yeah, to that point too, I mean, in line with what Gary's saying in the preventive maintenance arena, you know, we often see in our own internal audits where somebody is not following the procedure the way it's written to be manufactured on the floor exactly. And, you know, quite often it's not necessarily the case that you change what the operator is doing and have them do what the procedure says. You take a pragmatic look at it and say, is it necessary to do that way? Or is the way the operator is doing it fine? In which case you can go in and either change the procedure to the way the operator is doing it, or you can write it up as an optional method. And, you know, quite often it works out just as well one way as another. You just, sometimes you just change the order in which something's being done or the manner in which it's being done, or again, leave an option to do it either or, because it, you know, it doesn't necessarily come out wrong if the operator is not doing it exactly the way the procedure says.
I think you touched on something else, Gary, that, you know, as you said, as resources get smaller and smaller, there's a likelihood, and I ran into this on occasion, where I wasn't independent of what I was auditing. And, you know, that was tough. It's almost like, oh, nothing here, you know, nothing to see here. But, you know,
I've also had another one where one of the last training audits we did, one of the department managers said, you know, I want to do an in-depth audit of our training because I think there's some opportunities for improvement. I says, as long as you generate some findings and you say that this is, you know, you're doing this to uncover and improve, and it's like a natural extension of your job, and you have findings, because if you go through this and you don't have any findings, you say everything's just wonderful, then you're casting a lot of doubt.
I wanted to make this is Mike again. I wanted to make a comment about what Sharon had brought up, and I think it's an important aspect. It is, and I think we need to parse out what I call the self-inflicted wound, where, you know, someone's written a procedure that we shall do this every Tuesday at 3 p.m. and it's being done on Wednesday. You know, that, yeah, is it a deviation? Well, yeah, but it's self-inflicted. You've over-constricted, and in many times you have procedures that are highly constrictive, and people play around the edges, and they're still getting the job done. But it's your procedure that you've written and maybe not did the best job, as opposed to asking a group, do they have, you know, tell me about your management review meetings, and they said, oh, we don't do those anymore. We don't have the time. The standard clearly says that you have to have these, at least as far as I understand. So, you know, when someone says that they're not doing that, that's a big deal. That's a deviation that needs to be responded to. That's where I was going with this.
And that's why I made the recommendation that you really need to have the top managers involved in this, because the quality department isn't going to do most of the stuff on there, because 90% of the stuff that's on there has nothing to do with the quality department.
Got one. It's really strange. I'm seeing that some people can't seem to unmute. I can't unmute them, and it was weird because some can, and I'm not sure. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, can hear you.
Jumped off and I jumped back on. So one of the questions I had was, and I'm not sure if I'm the only one experiencing this, but the deliveries from suppliers. So I know no one's really prepared for a pandemic and issues with supply, issues with delivery, issues with all these different things. Do you guys have any suggestions on how to manage that? How to efficiently navigate our way to meeting some of the demands? So again, the struggle is a lot of our suppliers are getting hit with either loss of employees or limited on their supply chain side. How do you best manage something like this?
Yeah, I what the solution is. I mean, the supply chain disruptions right now and the employment situations, it's unprecedented. I think every organization is struggling with their suppliers not being able to meet demand. I guess, as a quality professional, one of the most important things we can do is to make sure that when we finally get those parts in, that they're good. So, focusing on supplier quality. I mean, you can't help them hire their people. You can't help them. If they're running out of raw material, I guess, maybe you can reach out to your sourcing team to help them find a different source of raw material. So, there's some collaboration things that might be able to happen. But I think the most impactful thing you can do as a quality professional is being aggressive and proactive with your suppliers to try to make sure that you're going to help them make quality products that won't get kicked out when they come into your facility. That's the only thing I can come up with right now because it's a complete mess out there. Our sourcing team is just out of their minds right now.
Yeah.
They're spinning their wheels on my end too. So it's pretty bad.
I think the most important thing that we've found is communication. We get into situations on both ends of it with our suppliers providing to us and us providing to our customers is to stay in constant contact. And as soon as you know something's going to be late, you want to let your customer know about it immediately and not just have the arrival date come and the material mysteriously doesn't show up. It's if you can let them know a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks in advance that you've got an issue and you're not going to be getting your raw materials, then your customer has an opportunity to plan around that to some degree. And I think the impact relationship wise is much less if you keep them in the loop and let them know in advance that you've got a problem coming up.
We had a customer that went from I think it was a 4-week lead time to a 6-week and then to a 12-week. And it's like, if you let us know, we can plan that. 3 months ahead, there's a lot of uncertainty, but at least we know that if we're not going to get it for 3 months, we got to place an order now. And we got hit with one of those situations a couple months ago. But yeah, just let us know if, yes, it used to be 4 weeks, but we understand. We're in the same boat.
And it can be the supplier. Right now there's, packing tape, and it's not that they can't receive the tape. It's the supplier that makes the tape can't get the glue to make the tape.
We've got very thing. We've got an adhesive that we can't get, and we're now getting it sourced out of Europe for this very same reason. Yep.
Yeah. Yes, it's all over the place.
I've got one other quick thing that's, maybe a little bit off agenda. It's more on the supplier end. And I'd like to know if anybody has any input on trying to handle the recent, over the last year or so, uptick in requirements from customers for REACH, ROHS, California Proposition 65 type information, and getting that information from suppliers. Customers typically send an email out and say, well, you do 30 products for us and each of them have 5 raw materials. That's 150 raw materials. We need all this information for REACH, ROHS, California Proposition 65, and we need it by next Friday. And it takes months, of course, to put this type of thing together. And so the challenges that we're seeing is, what part of the organization typically does this? When should the activity start? I kind of look at it as this is something that should happen in the design phase of products when materials are being selected, should be happening up front, at least being initiated with the design team. And, sometimes what we see happening is, we've been producing for 3 months and a customer comes in and says, oh, by the way, we need this and we need it now.
So normally that would happen in the design phase. At least in the company I work for, they try to incorporate. Let's say if they had FDA requirements, they try to incorporate what suppliers are available, and if they can meet those FDA requirements ahead of time before. So I would think in the design phase, it would be the best for any company.
Okay. All right. I would tend to agree with that. I don't always, like I said, see it being brought up by the customers during that period, but and it puts everybody behind the 8 ball, but that would seem to be most logical.
I can speak for Eastman. We run on SAP, and if you want to buy something from us, you have to have a material number. Part of the process to get a material number for a new product is, in our area, to see if it's see what the REACH issues are, see if there's any end of vehicle life issues, see if there's any conflict minerals, all that kind of stuff. That all these regulatory issues, that's got to be all understood before Eastman Corporate will issue us a material number for a new product. And we have a whole group called Product Stewardship that's responsible for managing that information. We have to supply them a lot in a form, but they're really the ones that review this and say, yeah, we have the right kinds of things, the right information is available, and we're in a position where we can approve this.
Okay. All right. Great.
This is Mike again, just kind of to, depending on what kind of business that you're in, if you're going to be buying raw materials and they're likely to end up in a consumer item, then, it's just part of that whole process. You need to have management understand that we're getting to the point where REACH, ROHS, Proposition 65, conflict minerals, in the industry I am, country of origin, Dodd-Frank, these are all elements that are becoming more and more of an issue. So it is a time well spent to just establish with all of your suppliers, this is information that we're going to need to know. And anytime you change something that changes the status, we have a need to know, and maybe have a questionnaire to them that goes out on an annual basis, and then having it collected in a logical manner, because with the consumer products, this isn't going away.
In the
Right.
automotive industry, you're also starting to see now a lot of the companies, especially in Europe, are starting to get very big on making sure that you don't have forced labor, child labor, you're not violating human rights, you're not involved in human trafficking and a whole bunch of stuff like that. And slowly but surely, most of the European OEMs are starting to adopt that as a customer specific requirement, which is essentially a condition of doing business.
I just want to share something that this came from McMaster Car. They wanted us to certify to RoHS. We make pry bars. It's not an electrical device used in any way, shape, or form, but it clearly lists chemicals and thresholds. And that's, one of the things about RoHS. And, basically what they wanted to know is, do you have any lead in it? Do you have lead? Yes or no? Well, our brass items do. Our steel items don't. So they used RoHS as a mechanism to try to look for toxic chemicals beyond the area that it's supposed to be for, which is electronic devices.
Okay. Well, I see we've gone over a little bit, but it's been a great discussion. I will send out the emails to everybody who participated. I have downloaded the list. I will stop the recording now.